and welcome to a compact, user-friendly edition of the Oddity Archive. Well, gang, I admit, I dropped the ball. Big time. A few years ago, actually more like several years ago now, I set out to make at least one history lesson episode per year dedicated to a specific video format, ideally one that gets at least some degree of use around the archive. And I haven't made one like that in a little over 3 years now. So I guess it's time to get the whole history of home video thing back on track here. And let's do so with, frankly, the most boring one of the lot. So today, let's tackle the first great consumer-grade camcorder format, and really the first format that was used here on Archive, at least indirectly. I'm talking about Video8, or 8mm video, and its children. The earliest camcorders were more like smaller, portable versions of a TV studio setup, with separate, but still connected, camera and tape recorder. The first was informally known as the SONY Video Rover, introduced in 1967, which recorded in black and white on half-inch open-reel tape and required a Sony CV Series VTR videotape recorder for playback. Oh yeah, and the first models had to have the tape rewound by hand.
For the first time. The VO3800 is a compact, portable, battery-operated, pneumatic machine. It utilizes this tape cassette.
1974 saw the introduction of U-matic S, which was a smaller but still fully compatible version of the 3/4-inch U-matic format, often referred to as a portapack. The U-matic S rig weighed somewhere to the tune of 40 pounds. Smaller or not, the U-matic format was, price-wise, well out of reach of the average consumer, leaving U-matic S to be a primarily professional product.
JVC's new portable VidStar video recorder and lightweight camera have some distinct advantages over home movie cameras.
In early 1978, JVC introduced a VHS version of these early portapack-styled rigs. That summer, Sony followed suit with a Betamax version. In 1980, Funai and Technicolor banded together to introduce the first dedicated videotape home movie format, the compact video cassette, or CVC, which, despite its small size, was another portapack-styled unit. CVC was legendarily unreliable and was back off the market by '82. Also in '82, JVC introduced a smaller, fully compatible version of their existing VHS format with VHS-C, or VHS Compact, announcing the first ever proper all-in-one camcorder along the way. However, the first VHS-C camcorder didn't drop until March of 1984. In the meantime, Sony managed to get an all-in-one full-sized Betamax camcorder out the door in the summer of 1983. Before JVC could get their first VHS-C camcorder out the door, in early January of 1984, Kodak announced their new 8mm video format, usually referred to as Video8, as to not be confused with 8mm film. Later in the year, Kodak released the first Video8 camcorders, namely the Kodavision 2000 series, which consisted of two models, the 2200 and the 2400, the only major difference being the latter had an autofocus feature. Like most early models, the price tag kept it out of the hands of most folks. In this case, the 2200 and 2400 went for about $1,600 and $1,900 respectively. Also, given that these early camcorders, not just Video8, were not capable of on-the-go playback, you needed access to a TV or VCR with the proper inputs to play back your tapes. At the time, Kodak envisioned Video8 as an odd hybrid home movie and home video format. Given that no standalone Video8 VCRs existed yet, the compromise was to place your camcorder into a cradle, or more accurately VCR chassis, at $200, and connect your camcorder to an external tuner timer unit at $300 if you wanted to do off-air recordings. In other words, a minimum $2,100 investment for a fully functional Video8 rig. The initial wave of blank Video8 tapes were capable of recording up to 1 hour, or an hour and a half at PAL speed. In time, 2-hour tapes were made available. And like most consumer videotape formats, a long play option was also soon made available. In the end, you could record up to 4 hours. Also, like VHS and most Betamax, quality differences were negligible, all of which providing only 240 lines of resolution with similar color response across the board. Having said that, much later in Video8's run, we're talking 1998, that number got bumped up to 270 lines of resolution thanks to the introduction of Sony's short-lived XR, or Extended Resolution, line of Video8 camcorders.
All you need is one hand and one eye, and you can control the miracle of the video age, Sony Handycam.
While a few other manufacturers had already jumped on the Video8 bandwagon, it took Sony to really push the format into the limelight. In 1985, Sony introduced their first Video8 camcorder, launching the still-used Handycam name in the process. Their first model was the CCD V8, which is noteworthy in that it was one of the first camcorders to take advantage of a charge-coupled device, or CCD, as opposed to a glass tube. Like the previous Kodak models, Sony's initial Handycams were not capable of on-the-fly playback. However, unlike Kodak's wonky cradle system, Sony wanted to take another crack at the home video format wars. As such, that same year, Sony introduced their first dedicated Video8 VCR. Sony's first Video8 VCR was the EV-S700. This VCR is notable not just for its attempt at replacing the traditional VHS or Beta VCR, but it was also the first VCR, and one of the very few, to have a built-in PCM recorder. For the uninitiated, pulse code modulation, or PCM, is a fully uncompressed digital audio recording format. You could record up to 6 4-hour stereo segments on a single would-be 120-minute Video8 tape. PCM on otherwise videotape was also how many early CDs were digitally mastered. In the spring of 1986, possibly seeing the end of Betamax as a home video format on the horizon, Sony doubled down on Video8 by inking a distribution deal with Paramount Pictures to issue a line of home videos on the format at a lower price, $30 or less, than what most major studio home video went for at the time. The first titles dropped later in the year. The quality of Video8 is about on par with standard play mode Hi-Fi VHS and X2 speed Hi-Fi Betamax.
Being cool, you'll find.
Hi
is a state of mind.
Nice leg.
A refreshing attitude. Come on, shortcut. Things get hot. Cool is all you got. Doing it country cool.
JVC introduced Super VHS, or SVHS, in 1987, with SVHS, usually SVHS compact, camcorders arriving by the end of the year. At its best, SVHS could just about match the quality of a Laserdisc, 420 lines of resolution to a Laserdisc's 425. In response, Sony turned around and created a consumer equivalent to their existing professional Betacam SP format. This became known as High 8, or High Band 8mm, which was introduced in early 1989. Like Betacam SP, High 8 was designed to be backward compatible with its parent format.
A Sony Handycam. Will I be able to use it? Sure, Grandma. It's simple. Come on, boys. Let's go get some pictures of you on the swing.
Simple enough to give you great results.
The switch to high-band video necessitated a new tape formula, which, as best as I can gather, simply meant upping the amount of metal particles in the tape stock, which would make sense as the tape would need to be, for lack of a better term, more abrasive to keep up with the greater technical demands. Having said that, I'd imagine a standard 8 tape would record in a high 8 camcorder, though the results might be less stable. Conjecture aside, one unintended result of high 8 in its early years was that Sony, like U-Matic and Betamax before it, didn't quite have the tape formula down right away. As such, the first several years' worth of, especially Sony High 8 tape, became prone to premature decay. Read the archive's favorite thing in the whole wide world, sticky shed syndrome.
Now, the Sony Handycam camcorder you just purchased features an indicator that tells you how much recording time you have left. But even with that feature, you should never go anywhere without a backup battery.
As far as consumer-grade small tape formats go, Video8, High 8, VHS-C, and SVHS-C all managed to peacefully coexist for much of the 90s. However, in 1996, Sony introduced DV-Cam, an adaptation of the then-new DV digital video codec. DV-Cam tape was available in two sizes, standard and mini. Soon after, Sony introduced the first miniature DV-Cam, or mini-DV, camcorders, which soon made a splash in professional and prosumer circles. Sony, wanting to bring DV squarely into the consumer realm, went back and revisited their old High 8 format. At the beginning of 1999, Sony announced the logical next step, and really logical end, to the 8mm video format, Digital 8. On a spec level, Digital 8 and Mini DV were interchangeable. Depending on your source, Digital 8 and Mini DV topped out between 500 and 540 lines of resolution, but in all reality was 480 lines in the analog realm, or 480 pixels in the digital realm. Any differences in picture quality came down to the quality and features of the gear used. Having said that, Mini DV was eventually able to do full-fledged 1080p high-def video, thanks to the HDV, or High Definition Video, codec, introduced in 2003, but not implemented until a few years later.
Got something for me?
Whereas High 8 needed a more robust tape to handle the greater technical demands over standard Video 8, Digital 8 used the same tape stock as High 8. However, to cope with the demands of digital recording and playback, the main head drum had to spin at 2.5 times the speed of its predecessors. Funnily enough, I was never too impressed with the quality. For those that remember the first season of Archive, this show was initially shot on Digital 8, and provided the springboard for the still occasionally ongoing carpet vision jokes. As in, the extra video noise from shooting in low-light conditions invariably made Archive look like it was shot on film, 8mm of course, then projected on someone's carpet.
I don't know and I don't care. It's past my bedtime.
Anyway, with the advent of Digital 8, Sony pulled the plug on any remaining standard Video 8 camcorders. Having said that, most Digital 8 camcorders and video Walkmans and such were, in terms of playback, fully backward compatible with standard 8 and High 8. Sony introduced the last Digital 8 camcorder in 2005, namely the DCR TRV-285 Handycam. I can't find anything concrete, but it appears that Sony discontinued this model in 2007. Amazingly, as of the making of this episode, Sony still produces High 8/Digital 8 tape, albeit in limited quantities. Standard Video 8 also managed a lengthy later life as a means of providing in-flight entertainment on commercial airlines. And while there may very well be Video 8 equipped aircraft still in use, as of this episode anyway, it appears that the last actual use of it was in 2015. Also, as a fun bit of trivia, Video 8 was the preferred video format on Michael Jackson's tour bus, with movies run off specially for Jackson. Well, I admit, I have a long history of abbreviating Digital 8 as D8. Apparently, this is incorrect. In 1987, the Exabyte Corporation, in the spirit of audiocassette computer data backup, introduced the first 8mm data backup device. The name of the media? D8, or Data 8. As best as I can gather, Data 8 tape is standard Video 8 tape stock, just in a slightly modified cassette. These tapes could store 3.5 gigabytes, or technically 7 gigabytes at the highest compression level, of data on a single tape. Very impressive for the time. Later, Sony managed to do one better with the release of AIT, or Advanced Intelligent Tape, in 1996, which was metal evaporated tape, as opposed to the more common metal particle. By 2004, at its most advanced, a Mammoth 2, or M2 backup deck, could cram 60 gigabytes of data on the longest available tape. Of course, by this point, things like flash media were becoming more common and affordable. As best as I can tell, new Data 8 equipment was discontinued in 2006, though the tapes held on a bit longer.
SONY RUVI 機係相機，又係攝錄機喎。
Okay, let's close things out with a true oddity. In, once again, one of Sony's more questionable moments of sanity, they took half an hour's worth of their existing High 8 tape, locked it into a small cartridge, also containing a head drum, like any other in videotape, and sold it in a fixed-focus, non-backlit camcorder. This was known as the RUVI, introduced in 1998. Sony only released one model of the RUVI, the CCD CR1, which retailed for $800. In short, you could record half an hour of video or 350 still images per cartridge. Like a lot of still image capable camcorders of this period, the camcorder would latch onto a single image, hold it for 5 seconds, and record any incidental audio that happened to occur during this time. Given that most of the camcorder's inner workings were locked away in the cartridge alongside the tape, you couldn't just pop down to the store and buy more tapes. The cartridge was intended to reuse the tape again and again until the tape wore out or got chewed, at which point you would take it down to your local authorized Sony dealer, who would, for a fee, service and install new tape into the cartridge. Unsurprisingly, the RUVI was discontinued in 1999. Hey, you! Wake up! I really hate these boring topics. Well, that's it for today's archive. Join me next time when I haplessly attempt to figure out where I'm supposed to stick the cassette in this newfangled camcorder of mine. I mean, the thing's got to be just about out of tape by now. It's only been about 4 months.
Easier than hooking up video games.
Sony Handycam, using the smaller, superior cassette.
There's no question. It's a Sony.